And when it is, it will be a triumph for our Constitution, it will be a triumph for personal liberty, and most importantly, it will be a triumph for the American people who persevered in their resistance to this law. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
U.S. Senate came in this morning at 10:30 Eastern. They will gavel out at 12:30 for their weekly party caucus lunches, and back at 2:15 p.m. Eastern to begin consideration of the FAA authorization bill. Amendments and votes are possible throughout the afternoon. Again, that'll be at 2:15. They're in a period of morning business after hearing from Senator McCaskill and Senator Corker about proposed legislation. The Corker-McCaskill bill, according to Senator McCaskill's office, will permanently limit spending to a responsible level compared to the economy using historical markers to set limits. Senator Corker and Senator McCaskill spoke about that legislation as the Senate gabbled in this morning. Also, some Senate news. The Associated Press is reporting that the Ethics Committee in the Senate today named a special counsel to investigate Senator John Ensign, whose affair with a campaign aide led to a probe of the Nevada Republicans' attempts to find a lobbying job for the woman's husband. That from the Associated Press. In Senate hearings today, Senate Budget Committee is meeting today, hearing about the 10-year economic outlook. And that's live, by the way, now on C-SPAN. Foreign Relations Committee is also meeting at this hour. They're hearing about the transition in Iraq from military to civilian leadership there, hearing from U.S. Ambassador James Jeffrey and also from the commander in Iraq, General Austin. That is live now on our companion network, C-SPAN 3.
Madam President,
Senator from Illinois.
I ask consent the quorum call be suspended
Without objection.
and consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Madam President, it is interesting as we face one of the toughest economic recessions in modern history and a world in turmoil as many countries are challenging their leadership and assessing their future, that the focal point of the Republican legislative effort appears to be the repeal of health care reform. If you take a look at what the American people think about this, they don't agree. They think that if there are ways to improve the bill, we should do it. If there are changes we can make in this bill to make it more effective, we should. But the notion that we would repeal this law and walk away from the basic provisions in it, it's not accepted by the majority of people. The House Republicans, new to the majority this year, decided they needed to keep faith with their followers and repeal health care reform as their highest priority. I sense, as the whip in the Senate here, who counts votes on at least one side of the aisle, that we are not going to repeal this law, nor do I think we should. But it appears that the Senate Republicans want us to spend some time debating the issue as to whether or not health care reform is good for America. I welcome that debate because, as you know, Madam President, when we reflect on what we have achieved so far in a little over a year with this health care reform and what is to follow, it strikes me as unusual that there are people who want to walk away from all of that. The important starting point in this debate is government-administered health care. If you listen to the other side, on the Republican side, the thing they object to the most is the fact that the government has some hand in this health insurance industry. They call it government-run health care. Those who would take the time to read the bill, and I have, will realize that at the end of the day, the only entities offering health insurance in America are private companies, aside from the traditional Medicaid, Medicare programs. So what the Republicans are objecting to is a government effort to extend the availability of private health insurance to more and more Americans. What I find out about this is that every single Republican and Democratic senator is protecting their own families with government-administered private health insurance. The very thing that they are condemning in the health care reform bill is the source of their own personal health insurance for their families. You see, members of Congress are part of the Federal Employees Health Benefit Program, a program that covers 8 million federal employees and their families. My wife and I each year have an open enrollment where we can choose from 9 different private health insurance companies in the state of Illinois. We pick the plan that we like the best. At our point in life, we have more coverage than younger people might, and more money is taken out of my paycheck because of that decision. But it is our decision to pick this private insurance company and a plan administered by the federal government. So as the Republicans stand and criticize the notion of extending this availability and option to more and more Americans, they are criticizing the very same insurance plan that they are using to protect their own families. If it's good enough for a member of the Senate, shouldn't it be good enough for most Americans? The insurance exchanges that we are creating here will offer this option for people to choose from private health insurance plans in the future. That, to me, is a good thing. It's certainly been good for my family in terms of the Federal Employees Health Benefit Program. There are other parts of the health care reform bill which the Republicans want to repeal, and I know the American people think are very valuable. Right now, young adults up to the age of 26 would lose their insurance coverage through their parents' health plans if the Republicans prevail. This would affect 47,200 people in my state of Illinois and 1.2 million annually. Who are these young people, age 25? Well, they're graduates of college looking for jobs. They're finished with their education and maybe student health insurance if they had it, and they're looking for a job, and maybe the first one they find may not offer benefits. So mom and dad say, don't worry, we still have you under the family health insurance plan. That's part of the health care reform bill that these people on the Republican side of the aisle want to repeal. I can remember going through this with our kids. Others do too. You called them after college. Jennifer, how you doing? Fine. hey, do you have health insurance? Oh, Dad, I don't need that yet. I'll get it later. At which point you say, girl, you've got to have it. If we have to pay for it, you've got to have it. Because we all know that we're one diagnosis or one accident away from needing health insurance. That worry is relieved for those through the age of 25 under health care reform and would be repealed by the Republicans. How about lifetime limits? People with private insurance coverage, if the Republicans have their way and repeal this measure, would find themselves suddenly vulnerable again to having lifetime limits placed on how much insurance companies will spend on their health care. This affects 7.5 million people in Illinois and 165 million nationally. I talked to a retired firefighter in Chicago. He happened to be a man who volunteered and went to New York at 9/11. And he came down with leukemia. And he said, I said, how you doing? He said, I'm feeling good, and I've gotten a lot of treatment, and it's working. But I'm worried. I don't qualify. I'm not old enough to qualify for Medicare yet. And I have a limit on my policy of $1 million. I had no idea I was going to come down with cancer. I've already spent $750,000. If I run into some need for additional medical care, it's going to take that out of my savings if I go past this limit. We eliminate the limits on the health insurance policies. Repeal of the law will reestablish those limits. How about rescissions? Insurance companies, if the Republicans have their way and repeal our Affordable Health Care Act, would once again be allowed to cut off someone's coverage unexpectedly when they're in an accident or become sick because of a simple mistake on the application. That would leave 612,000 people in Illinois and 15.9 million nationally at the risk of losing their insurance at the moment they need it the most, as one of the worst abuses of the insurance industry would become legal again if the Republicans have their way and repeal affordable health care. How does this work? Well, I can tell you what happens. We've seen it. People have contacted our office. The most notorious example was a woman who said that when she needed coverage for a surgery, the health insurance company went through her application and said, oh, you failed to disclose a pre-existing condition. We disqualify you. We rescind the policy. She asked, what pre-existing condition? Acne. You had acne when you were a teenager. Well, think about it. Would you ever put that down as a pre-existing condition when you're applying for health insurance? It was enough for the health insurance company to turn her loose and refuse to cover her. Also, nearly 7.5 million residents of Illinois and 165 million annually would not know if they're receiving value for their health insurance premium dollars because the Republican repeal of health care would remove the requirement that insurers spend at least 80 to 85% of premium dollars on actual health care, not on bonuses, not on salaries, not on advertising, not on administrative, but actually on health care. It's an effort to have the states monitor these health insurance companies and make sure when the premiums or the rates go up that the money being collected is actually going to health care. That would be eliminated if the Republicans have their way to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act. How about preventive care? Nearly 1.8 million seniors in Illinois who have Medicare coverage and 44 million nationally would be forced to pay a copay to receive important preventive services like mammograms and colonoscopies, and they wouldn't receive a free annual wellness visit. Now, we know what happens when a person doesn't have a lot of money and is in their senior status and they're faced with the possibility of getting a test, they put it off. And the longer you put it off, unfortunately, it's more likely something bad will occur. The Republican repeal of health care would mean that this preventive care currently offered under the bill for Medicare recipients would be eliminated. And then there's the donut hole, or the gap in coverage for Medicare prescription drugs. 109,421 seniors in Illinois, 2.7 million nationally, would see significantly higher prescription drug costs if the Republicans are successful and repeal health care. Last year, these beneficiaries received a one-time tax-free $250 rebate to help fill the gap for prescription drugs in the donut hole coverage gap. Medicare beneficiaries who fall into the donut hole in 2011 will be eligible for 50% discounts on covered brand name prescription drugs. And without the law, the burden of high prescription drug costs would hurt millions of Medicare beneficiaries across the country. That is the reality. What the Republicans would do with the repeal of health care is to say to seniors on fixed incomes, Turn to your savings, pull more out of your savings for the prescription drugs that your doctor tells you you need to stay well. We are filling that gap, filling that hole, and they want to go back to the old days when seniors were on their own. Then there's the early retiree reinsurance program. 279 employers in my state, 4,748 nationally, wouldn't receive help from this program. It's a program that provides businesses, schools, unions, state and local governments, and nonprofits much-needed financial relief to help early retirees and their families continue to have quality, affordable health care coverage. Who are these people? One of them was in my family. My brother retired working for a major corporation before he reached the age of 65. He had a heart attack and needed surgery, and he couldn't get insured. He had to wait until he was qualifying for Medicare. This plan allows early retirees to find insurance before they qualify for Medicare and provides an incentive for that to happen. The repeal of this law by the Republicans would basically eliminate that program. So when they stand before us and tell us that they're just doing the right thing, what Americans really want, I'm afraid that isn't the case. Most Americans want us to keep health care reform, change it, modify it if necessary, but don't repeal it. Because when we repeal it, these basic things that I've described here are going to be in trouble. Now, what about this court case yesterday in Florida? It's getting a lot of attention today. A judge in Florida issued a decision in the case filed by 25 Republican attorneys general and governors striking down the Affordable Health Care Act. This ruling is out of the mainstream of judicial reasoning in its treatment of precedent and in the type of analysis employed. I don't think it's likely to be upheld. 12 federal judges have already dismissed challenges to the constitutionality of the health reform bill, and 2 judges in the Eastern District of Michigan and Western District of Virginia have upheld the law. In one other case, a federal judge in the Eastern District of Virginia issued a very narrow ruling on the constitutionality of the health reform law's individual responsibility provision and upheld the rest of the law. The ruling yesterday in Florida, issued by Judge Vinson in the Northern District, is a plain case of overreaching. The judge declared the entire law was null and void, even though the only provision he found unconstitutional related to the individual responsibility provision. This decision is at odds with decades of established Supreme Court law, which has consistently found that courts have a constitutional obligation to preserve as much of a statute as can be preserved. Under this view of the law, the estimated 4 million seniors who fall into the Medicare prescription drug coverage gap that I mentioned earlier will pay higher prices for prescription drugs if the judge from Florida has his way. 44 million seniors on Medicare denied access to preventive care. Up to 4 million small businesses will not be eligible for tax credits to make health care more affordable. New provisions that prevent insurance companies from denying coverage and the like will not become part of the law. History is on our side when it comes to this measure, Madam President. Tomorrow, the Senate Judiciary Committee, at my request, is going to hold a hearing on the constitutionality of the Health Care Reform Act. It's the first congressional hearing on this issue. And as a person who is aspiring to be the chairman of the Constitution Subcommittee, I ask that this be the first subject we take up. The reason I'm still aspiring is we haven't closed all of the negotiations about funding of committees, so nothing has become formal yet, but it's likely to occur. And what we'll look at tomorrow is Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. That is the article that specifically says the powers that Congress, the Senate, and the House have. They spelled it out. And in the course of spelling it out, they said, among other things, that we had the power to tax, the power related to provisions relating to commerce. And it came to be viewed in the courts as interstate commerce, commerce between the states or between the United States and other nations. Those who are arguing that the health care reform bill is unconstitutional first argue that the health care insurance industry is not commerce. If the health care insurance industry, which offers industry across state lines to millions of Americans, is not commerce, and it affects 18% of our economy, then I don't know what commerce might be. I think that position is particularly weak. When it comes to the individual responsibility or individual mandate system that's in the bill, the question that's being asked of the court is, why is this necessary? Well, here's why it's necessary. If you say to insurance companies you don't have to insure anyone with a pre-existing condition, then, of course, they're going to exclude people. But if you tell them you have to insure everybody, even those with pre-existing conditions, then the obvious question is, when will a person buy insurance? If you don't have a responsibility on individuals to buy insurance, two things will occur. They'll wait until they're sick to buy insurance, which completely destroys the risk model that insurance companies use, or they'll present themselves as they do today at many hospitals for coverage and care that's passed on to other people. So the individual responsibility section says if you don't have insurance coverage, then you have to pay a tax penalty. And that is what many are objecting to. You cannot eliminate exclusions for pre-existing conditions and not move more and more people into the risk pool at an earlier stage. If people can wait till the last minute to get into the risk pool, then the insurance model is destroyed. That's why it's in there. I think what we'll find ultimately, and I hope we do, from the Supreme Court, is that what we have passed is entirely consistent with the regulations or powers given to Congress under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution to deal with issues of commerce. Secondly, that the imposition of a tax, as it does in this bill, the health care reform bill, is clearly enumerated in the powers given to Congress to levy taxes, and that what we have done is necessary and proper to reach the goal where we eliminate discrimination because of pre-existing conditions in health insurance plans. That debate is ahead of us, but it's a debate that we need to take up. I'm happy to talk about the health care reform bill because I think it's a move in the right direction. It's not perfect. It can be improved. But if the Republicans want to repeal it, they're in for a fight, because the important provisions that we have here to protect families and businesses need to be protected. What we want to bring up as soon as we can, when we get beyond this debate on health care repeal, is the reauthorization of the Federal Aviation Administration. We have been struggling with this issue for a long, long time. And we believe that this bill, which our Majority Leader Harry Reid is asked to bring to the floor, creates and protects more than 280,000 jobs by modernizing the air travel infrastructure and reducing costly delays. I think this is an important step forward, not just to create jobs when we need them very badly, but also to make certain that our airplanes and airliners and all those who are serving us at the airports have a safer environment, establishing new standards for safety when it comes to the operation of our airlines. I think this is a critical issue. I hope we can move to it soon. I'm sorry that we're going to be diverted into a debate on health care reform, but as I said, I think it's a welcome debate. It's time we brought some of these facts before the American people so they understand that health care reform has real value to families and businesses across the United States, making health care insurance more affordable and more accessible. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The Senate will be in session for another half an hour or so. They're in a period of general speeches, morning business. They'll gavel out at 12:30 Eastern for their weekly party caucus lunches, their weekly meetings. Then at 2:15, they'll come back in and they will begin consideration of the FAA reauthorization bill. David Hawkins, writing in CQ today, says there's one parliamentary glitch about this authorization bill. He writes that it needs to be solved because the bill includes revenue-raising provisions. It must catch a ride on a House bill that mentions revenue. The Constitution says that revenue bills have to start in the House. Well, the debate on that will start at 2:15 Eastern. Possible amendments and votes later on. We'll have live coverage, of course, of the Senate here on C-SPAN 2 when they come back in. A couple of Senate committees are meeting today. Over on C-SPAN 3, the Foreign Relations Committee is meeting, wrapping up shortly. They've been hearing from James Jeffrey, who's the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, and also General Austin, the commander in Iraq, on the transition from military. And you'll be able to find that soon on our video library if you missed it. Also going on is the Budget Committee, looking at a 10-year economic outlook and economic predictions. That is underway and continues, and you can follow that on our companion network, C-SPAN. The Senate is in this week. As we mentioned, their schedule for today. The U.S. House out this week for their district work period, and they're back next Tuesday. U.S. Senate came in this morning at 10:30 Eastern, and they should gavel out shortly in about 15 minutes at 12:30 Eastern for their weekly party caucus meetings, then back at 2:15 to begin work on a measure that reauthorizes the Federal Aviation Administration, a bill that aims to modernize the air traffic control system. And we might see amendments and possible votes this afternoon. Could also see some work on a bill that deals with small business innovation. The House is not in this week. They're back next Tuesday. And House coverage, of course, on our companion network, C-SPAN. On the Senate side, news today that the Senate Ethics Committee announced that it has begun an investigation of Senator John Ensign of Nevada, who's been accused of using his position to improperly help a former aide. The Hill writes that Senator Boxer, the chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Ethics, and Senator Johnny Isakson of Georgia, the ranking Republican member, announced the appointment of Carol Elder Bruce to serve as a special counsel for the, quote, preliminary inquiry. U.S. Senate continues in a quorum call, waiting for senators to come to the floor to speak, and we expect them to gavel out within the next 15 to 20 minutes for their weekly party lunches. While we're in this quorum call, we're going to bring you a Pentagon briefing from earlier today. The number 2 U.S. commander in Afghanistan today said he expects the Taliban to increase the targeting of local political leaders this spring and summer. Lieutenant General David Rodriguez also talks about Pakistan border operations. He spoke to reporters for 45 minutes, and we'll show you what we can as the quorum call continues.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome back to the Pentagon briefing room someone who's no stranger here, Lieutenant General David Rodriguez, who is commander of the International Security Assistance Force Joint Command, also known as IJC. He also serves as Deputy Commander of United States Forces Afghanistan. General Rodriguez assumed his duties in June of 2009, and he subsequently became the first commander of the IJC in October of 2009. Previous to that, General Rodriguez was the commander of Regional Command East for 15 months, and from January 2007 to April 2008. So he has spent 34 of the last 48 months in Afghanistan. The General most recently spoke with us last summer via satellite from Kabul, and we're grateful that he has made time to update us today here in person on the situation in Afghanistan. And with that, sir, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be back here in the Pentagon briefing room. And those of you who know me know there's a little tongue-in-cheek there. But thank you for your interest in Afghanistan. This morning I will tell you about where we've come from over the last 18 months and give you a sense of where we're headed. 18 months ago, we wrote the first countrywide operational level comprehensive campaign plan that included our Afghan partners. That combined team of both ISAF as well as the three security ministries, the Minister of Interior, the Minister of Defense, and the National Directorate of Security, all put that plan together. Now, one of the important concepts was to concentrate and synchronize our efforts where it was most important. Population centers, commerce routes, and areas of economic potential. That's the shaded area on the map in front of you. Now, the Afghans, they were the ones who told us and guided us to those key areas based on their knowledge of the human and the physical terrain of Afghanistan. The process started a year-long effort to get everybody on the same sheet of music, synchronizing efforts in time and space. Our first foray using this strategy was down in the central Helmand River Valley. A coordinated civil-military effort on both the international community and the Afghan partners. That's number one on your map. While there were almost immediate security effects through the partnered operations that we conducted there, the Afghans, supported by the international community, of course, had a tougher time building government capacity in the wake of the security gains. But the partner team learned some significant lessons during those operations that they were able to apply in the summer and fall of 2010 in Kandahar City and its environs. And that's number two on your map. Several of these lessons included the need for prior planning to prepare government activities in advance. We all had to improve the complementary effects of the conventional and special operations forces. The Minister of Interior learned some lessons on recruiting and training police forces, which were much more effective in the follow-on operations. And we all learned that building local political bodies that represent the people is an iterative process. And as more and more people are mobilized, the representative councils become more representative and more effective. So now in the Arghandab, a district just outside Kandahar City that you know has been a tough place since the first time we really went in there and stayed, beginning in July 2009, was a Taliban stronghold, and people could not move around without fear. In that 18-month period, the district governor was killed, the district police chief was maimed, and there were no government officials or police present any place but the district center, which some of the Afghans described as a combat outpost. Now, I was there 2 weeks ago, and there were 16 government employees working with a new district governor. There's a new police chief who has a police force that's out and about. And the people on a Friday afternoon, Afghan family time, were out picnicking in the Arghandab River Valley. A significant change from 18 months ago. Now, throughout this time in other regions of the country, in Kabul City, Kabul province, as well as the east, the north, and the west, we made smaller but steady gains. In Kabul City, number 3 on your map, there were very few spectacular attacks in 2010. In fact, we went almost 7 months without one, which is the longest on record in the last several years. There are also several important high visibility events, like the Kabul Conference and the Peace Jirga, that were conducted without incident with the Afghan National Security Forces in the lead. We started to expand the Kabul security zone both east and south. And the east saw gains in discrete areas. In Jalalabad, out in Nangarhar, which is at number 4 on your map, as well as pockets in Logar and Wardak, just south of Kabul City. The east, of course, as you know, has difficult, complex, and physical terrain, and there's much work to be done there. Up in the north, we focused on Baghlan. And what's important in that area is the intersection of 2 of the main commerce routes. So we expanded the security around that intersection and increased the freedom of movement in that area in the north. And as you look at number 6 going around counterclockwise on your map, that's very important because that's the last place that the ring road has to be completed. Of course, an important commerce route to connect the west and the north, and we made security gains in both Baghdis and Faryab. Herat, number 7 on your map, is a bustling city, largely free from violent incidents and ready to transition to Afghan lead very soon. In general, last year saw the implementation of a plan that demanded focus and synchronization. And we all saw that where we do that, we make steady progress. Our immediate focus right now is to accelerate certain effects throughout the wintertime, a time that traditionally sees less violence, when the enemy refits, rearms, retrains, and prepares for the upcoming spring and summer operations. And while this is going on, we're conducting shaping operations to make the environment for the enemy much more inhospitable than it was last year. And I can tell you more about that later, if you like. Now, we've just finished a review and update of that plan that we began last year, and there is now expanded participation in those planning efforts. So the U.S. and U.K. embassies, other civilian players, as well as, very, very importantly, the Afghan ministries, civilian ministries of the Independent Director of Local Governance and the Minister of Rural Rehabilitation and Development also participate in that plan, all together helping to bring better coordinated effects to a common plan. So we're going to stick with the current approach. We're going to continue to expand the security areas outward from the central Helmand River Valley and Kandahar City and its environs, connect these 2 secure areas, and also connect them out to Wesh Shaman, which is just southeast of Kandahar City, an important commerce route from the central Helmand River Valley out to Pakistan. We'll also continue to expand the Kabul security zone and continue to slow but steady progress in the north and west. Important this year, of course, to build the durability and the sustainability of the Afghan National Security Forces. And as you know, we put a tremendous effort last year to get the infantry forces fielded to increase the number of boots on the ground for the Afghan security forces. And this year, NTMA will focus on logistics, the other enablers, the engineers, to support the long-term sustainability of the Afghan Army. There are tremendous efforts being made in both literacy as well as leadership training. Again, all important things to sustain the Afghan Army in the future. And add quality to the quantity that we produced last year, which was 70,000 new Afghan National Security Forces. And as you know, we focused most of our attention in the Army, and we'll continue the Army moving forward, but of course the police needs more emphasis, and we're adjusting our emphasis to support those efforts now. We'll continue to support the building of the local governance that serves the people. And again, I'm confident that we have the right approach, that where we focus our efforts together, we see progress, and that we're helping to set the conditions for the people to participate more fully in building a better future for themselves. Our challenge is to help the Afghans, as they increasingly take the lead, make this progress durable. Now, there's still a lot of work to be done, but I'm confident, as are my Afghan partners and the troops in the field, that it's worth doing, and together we can continue to build on the progress we've made this year. Now I'll take your questions.
General, there are sort of 2 key areas where you'll need success. One, obviously, being along the Pakistan border from the Pakistanis, and two, as you mentioned, the training up of the Afghan security forces. Can you talk a little bit about what progress you're making in working with the Pakistanis to get them to move a little more aggressively there? And have you decided how many more Afghan security forces you're going to need as you move towards this transition? And have you convinced other countries to help contribute trainers?
Okay, thank you. First, on the PAC military coordination, we continue to grow our relationships with the PAC military. We conduct combined planning with both the Pakistan military, the Afghan National Security Forces, and ourselves. We have increased that planning effort over the year, and right now we're conducting planning conferences between the three partners on the complementary operations that will occur over the next 6 months. So we continue to be optimistic that that will move in the right direction, and the coordination between both the Afghans and the PAC military has continued to increase over the last year. On the Afghan National Security Forces, that's going through the decision process right now, and General Petraeus and the ISAF leadership is working hard to get that decision made, and we'll see how it turns out.
Do you mean, when you talked about the Pakistani effort, are you talking about joint operations between the U.S., Afghans, and Pakistanis, both on the Afghan side of the border and on the Pakistan side of the border?
Yes, when I meant to say complementary operations, right now, for example, there's significant operations going on in Pakistan in the Moman and Bajur areas up in the north. And right now we have complementary operations going on our side of the border, so that, again, what we're able to do is squeeze them and take advantage of those operations. And we're planning them all the way up and down the whole border of Afghanistan for the next year.
Can I follow up on that,
yes.
General? If the Pakistanis do not move decisively into North Waziristan, taking on Haqqani and other militants in that area, will you be able to deliver, how much of a setback to your efforts on the Afghan side of the border will that be in the springtime? How important is it for Pakistanis not just to continue in Bajur where they are, but move into North Waziristan?
Well, again, all that has a positive impact on what we're trying to do. And it also leads to the durability of what we have to build on the Afghan side of the border. So we're working together for them to continue the operations, especially against those that threaten the Pakistani state. And together, we think that will move in the right direction.
Can you win without them? If they don't do any more than they're doing now, can you be successful in Afghanistan?
I think we can, but again, that gets back to the durability that you have to build in the Afghan security forces and the Afghan government. But I think that's doable if it doesn't continue, if it doesn't get significantly worse. Yes?
General, there was a report in the British press this week about how Taliban guys in Sangin specifically were going after their own kind of rank and file as well as village leaders there because they were edging toward negotiating or dealing with ISAF and the NATO forces. Is that something you've seen elsewhere, and does it complicate the efforts to kind of wind up the American presence if the Taliban will neutralize its own elements that are willing to deal with the United States and ISAF?
That's been their response in just about every case. Again, the things that threaten them are good security forces and good government. And where that's happened, their response is to go after those leaders to prevent that from happening. That has been the tendency every place that we've gone, and it will continue to be it because, again, that's the biggest threat to their control of the people. Yes, ma'am. They're killing their own. Again, now, their own. You got to understand that in that insurgency, there's a hierarchy of the most committed to the least committed. And they have been going after the people who were part of their efforts before, but are on the lower scale, who are trying to turn over and support their government.
Do you have any evidence, any more information at this early point of whether the Taliban will be able to reconstitute themselves for the spring? That's always been the big question. That's my first question. The second one is, I'm sorry to ask this.
President, Senator from California.
I asked the quorum call be
without objection.
Madam